vibe of the mining endowment, depending on who you speak to? What do you see as the key talking points to come out of 2015?
The key points probably last year, there was some criticism of the minister's speech. The primary criticism being that she was possibly painting a rosy picture when she shouldn't have been and not addressing the challenges. This year, obviously, the minister has taken a very different view, and although he didn't address them necessarily as head-on as we would have liked, he dealt with the challenges and ended off on a very positive note.
And for people that didn't hear the speech, can you outline some of the challenges that were put forward?
There's obviously a difference between the written speech which he had and then the points that he raised. But obviously the points that he raised generally were very good. Unemployment, inequality, and very importantly reconfirming that the mining industry is still one of the primary mechanisms of addressing poverty and inequality in the South African context.
And there seems to be good sentiment for north of the border. Can you compare that to the sentiment within South Africa?
Again, depending on who you speak to, but the general consensus is South Africa very flat, no immediate prospects, but north of our borders, open-ended opportunity.
What's going to give the South African industry a kick up the backside to get it moving again?
Well, foreign direct investment down. Again, a couple of monitors that have gone out today, 2.6% down. Those are the kicks in the pants that we're going to be seeing, and I think that's a good thing.
And last year, beneficiation was the big buzzword. How much of that was just talk, and how much has actually been put into action?
A lot of it has been put into action. Beneficiation is based predominantly on infrastructure. So the development plans, once the infrastructure has been agreed to, put in place, money spent, beneficiation will follow. So no, it wasn't simply a commitment in words, it's been put into action.
That's good to hear. And compliance has been the big talking point that you've been putting forward in the last 12 months. Some legislation on the table. Where do you think we're going with all of that?
Compliance still a significant area of concern. And even, for example, the fact that the fatalities were lower in 2014 doesn't mean that there's compliance. There's still a lot of work to be done. But it's an important aspect, but one of the most important aspects at the moment, environmental compliance. Big talk topic this year. Environmental compliance is going to continue to be a key issue going forward, and high-profile prosecutions being spoken about, regulatory intervention, big teams going out to operations. We're probably going to see more of that this year.
So we're going to see some more high-profile court cases, presumably in the next 12 months, with hopefully some jail time to actually enforce these laws.
Well, it's difficult for me to talk about jail time. I defend most of the mining managers, so very difficult to talk about jail time. Is enforcement required? Yes. Most mining companies are committed, they do what they can, but unfortunately there are mining companies that don't. And in those circumstances, it's a name and shame scenario, and that is probably going to be a good thing for the industry.
Absolutely. And at yesterday's Digby Wells launch, mine closures was a big topic of discussion. How many mines are actually planning for the future and not just planning for profits?
Yeah. The sustainability issue is quite interesting at the moment, and one of the aspects which I don't think has been dealt with sufficiently is the regional impacts, both positive and negative. In other words, when you're looking at sustainability, if you can get economies of scale, mining companies that go it alone aren't going to be able to achieve what they hope to achieve. They simply don't have the capacity or the funding. So regional approaches, cooperation between companies is absolutely necessary, but also there's a negative component. If you look at the figures, it seems like about 90 to 95 companies closed down in the Rustenburg region as a result of the strike and never came back. Couldn't resuscitate it, they went out of business. And that's a regional impact which I don't think that the mining companies are necessarily looking at enough. So sustainability on a regional basis, huge aspect, something which requires attention this year.
And you touched on a moot point, unions. I mean, what is really the future of unions as we become more and more mechanized?
The unions are here to stay, they will be around, there's a place for trade unions. Many of the trade unions are very mature about how they approach things, and it's a power play at the moment. It's going to play itself out whether we like it or not, and whether you've got an operator on a machine or a person with a shovel at a conveyor belt, it's going to play itself out. The trade unions are going to be here for a long time. They have been, they will be, it has to play its way out.
I guess it just has to evolve.
It has to evolve, and it will get to a point where there's stability.
When you're talking power plays, electricity seems to be one of the major talking points.
Yes.
Can you map the way forward of how we're going to dig ourselves out of this thing?
Literally.
Without using too much coal?
Without. The coal side, our energy source is still 95% from coal. So coal is an absolutely critical mineral. The process of extracting, selling, the balance between offshore and domestic use. So it's still another big topic for this year. Electricity, if you look at the challenges, it's probably our biggest challenge right now with the mining industry. It's not a tap. You can't turn it on and off. Your beneficiation, which you mentioned earlier, is dependent on a solid, sustainable supply of energy, and until that happens, we're going to have difficulties. That's why the mining companies are looking at self-supplying, and I think it's going to generate a whole new industry alongside the mining.
That's a very good point. So companies must actually take responsibility for themselves for power generation, not rely on government as a sole supplier.
Correct, and I think that's where most mining companies are looking at. It's expensive. It's a huge capital investment, but when you look at what is lost every single day with a power cut, it makes sense in the long term.
So when you're advising clients north of the border, you tell them take your own gennies, do it all yourself?
Yes, so a combination of gen sets, clean energy, solar, etc. And I mean, our solar projects are going incredibly well, and that's what we're going to have to look at going forward.
And nuclear, talks of 8 nuclear power stations is not really realistic. I mean, where do you stand on the nuclear debate?
Nuclear is obviously controversial, very, very controversial. It has an emotional connotation. You know, every time you put on the TV and you see a nuclear leak or a reactor going up, very, very emotional. So it's like fracking. You have to get over the emotional aspect. Is it a long-term sustainable source of energy? No, it's also dirty energy, and hence the focus on renewables.
Fracking, is that a long-term sustainable form of energy?
It's a good short to medium source of energy.
And if they do find that would obviously be a game changer for Southern Africa.
Yes, most definitely. It would be if any viable pockets or sources are found. It's a good source of energy for a long time to come.
Skills development. Do you think companies are doing enough to create a stream of? There's no real entrepreneurial programs anymore. I mean, where's the next wave of highly skilled people going to come from?
If we don't attend to the skills deficit or the skills gap, relevant skills, it's not going to happen. So money's got to come from somewhere. The mining industry's bursary funds, skills development programs, absolutely critical. But I certainly agree with the comments that it has to be relevant. I probably be criticised for this comment, but in many instances you see skills that are unrelated to the business, unrelated to that person's skill set, but they get a certificate on the wall, and that's simply not sustainable going forward. We need the engineers, you need the artisans, you need the operators.
And once they are trained, how can we retain their skills better?
The retention of skills is a completely different question. It's a merry-go-round, people move R4 more per month. It's quality of working conditions, quality of the employer, wanting to go to work in the mornings, feeling good about the employer. And that needs to be worked on. You know, sending around a meal trolley and things like that, it seems to be nothing, but it makes a difference and people feel more comfortable. Simple things like that.
Do you think we've seen the worst of the strike action?
Probably not. Will we have something as sustained as we had in the platinum side? Possibly not, because the minister's been very vocal about not allowing that again. But unfortunately, in January, we've seen many wildcat strikes already, and 2 very high-profile wildcat strikes involving Namanamku. That's not going to stop in the first. Certainly, I don't see it stopping in the first half of this year.
I was reading that the unions are fighting amongst themselves now. So, strong leadership is needed there.
Very strong leadership. There are very good, mature leaders within the unions. It's a question of politics at the moment, and a question of making sure that you're there and you're looking after your position and looking after your constituency. And as a result of that, very few leaders are taking a position where they can be exposed.
And South Africa is still one of the top 5 in terms of mineral resources, but not in terms of profitability. How can we take that step from having a great cricket team to winning the World Cup, if you will? Yeah.
Again, I think that Chris Griffith's talk probably gave direction to many people. It's mechanisation and automation. It's the only way that you can have that and turn that profit curve around. Our labour is incredibly expensive. Our mines are deeper. They're old-style mining. More capex is required. So unfortunately, it's mechanisation, automation.
And how suitable are 3 to 4K shafts to mechanisation, really deep stuff?
Well, obviously the older mines it's very difficult. When you go to an old drill and blast style extractive method versus board and pillar extractive method, the old mines are problematic. So it's easier to design new mines around that, or to deal with mines that are not that old. So probably 5 to 10-year-old mines can convert, but the older mines simply very difficult and probably not possible.
And now we're seeing University of Pretoria introducing virtual reality. How can technology streamline things for us going forward?
The technology and the 3D mapping of the work environments, simulation, absolutely critical. Remember, some of these operators, you're operating a vehicle of 30, 40 tons that can take a 90-ton payload, and you put a person into the driver's seat in that kind of equipment, and that person doesn't have a road license to drive a car on a road. So that whole conversion and the 3D simulations absolutely critical to train people physically in the environment.
And not to talk about Congo, are there any other neighboring countries, Sub-Saharan Africa, that we should keep our eye on in the next 12 months?
The hotspots, obviously, Nigeria is still very, very good. Namibia seems to be picking up again. West Africa will, as soon as everybody gets over the security and health concerns. So West Africa, absolutely still important. DRC is problematic at the moment because they've bypassed the industry and taken the new code directly, and that is creating uncertainty in the DRC at the moment. So very up and down. And I would say Nigeria and probably West Africa in due course as soon as the scare is over.
Uncertainty seems to be the major handbrake of growth in Africa. I mean, when are we going to get past that and actually have a more stable working environment?
It's obviously not just the working environment, it's the regulatory environment, it's the infrastructure environment, and then the employment environment. With the South African New Way Forward, the plan, the development plan, the African Union's vision, there's commitment and there seems to be money flowing. Once the infrastructure has been approved and in place, we'll see tremendous growth.
Government's been making some noises about pseudo-nationalisation. I mean, how can we decipher the noise from the actual reality?
Nationalisation obviously was a buzzword for a while, and that's now changed to nationalism as opposed to nationalisation. And that seems to have got people's emotions down a bit. So it's taken the temperature off by calling it nationalism, where it effectively belongs to the nation. The difficulty is how it's going to be achieved. We've all seen the responses to the previous draft of the MPRDA amendments and the spectre of taking 20 or 30 or 40%. I think the way that it's being looked at the moment is probably better. So through the state-owned mining companies, it's the right way of dealing with the nationalism component. Set up, as the Minister indicated, the new champion, set up the companies and deal with it through that mechanism.
And commodity price has been a little bit iffy. Where do you see that going in the next 12 months?
The commodity price is not great at the moment. Everything is down in some form or another, particularly on the coal side. If you look at that, iron ore, not a good outlook for 2015 at all. Probably nothing for the first half of this year. And if there's any improvement, it's going to be later in the year.
And where do you see the little shining lights appearing in the whole spectrum of things?
Well, it's not gold, it's not platinum. It's going to remain probably coal and the rare earths.
How do we maximize our coal fields? We've got massive reserves still.
Well, our reserves are probably another 100 years worth of reserves. I think it's 66 billion tons or something that's still in the ground. And the Waterberg and everything that has been, the infrastructure around the Waterberg, that's the focal point at the moment.